Let's get started. Good morning, I'm Sam Candy. I am CEO of Responsible Futures, an organisation that educates, guides and inspires people and companies to be more sustainable and socially responsible through webinars, training and consulting. Welcome to our webinar, Driving Sustainability in Retail, in partnership with our friends at Acopia Group. It's thanks to them that we're able to run this webinar free for the audience. I'm going to hand over to Terry from Acopia to kick off the webinar before we introduce our panelists. Terry.
Thanks, Sam. Yes, hello, my name's Terry Gardner from Acopia. We're a forward-thinking supplier of consumables and packaging to retailers across the UK and Europe, and we have a genuine thirst for sustainability. We're committed to keeping sustainability front and centre of all of the conversation currently. It's a huge narrative, and we're really committed to keeping it at the centre of everything we do for our clients. Thanks to Sam for facilitating this webinar. It's much appreciated, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panellists as well. The reason we're passionate about sustainability is because as consumers become more and more driven to make sustainable choices in the way they buy products and consume products, it's imperative that retailers deliver on sustainability too. We know that Gen Zs have done a huge amount of work in championing sustainability. The great news is that now Gen Alphas are now learning and challenging communities about ocean plastic, carbon, etc., those kind of things. So we need to understand that these generations are setting the bar high and setting high targets. And we need to understand what our customers and staff are looking for from us in regard of sustainability. And it's about taking responsibility for the environment. And it's of utmost importance that we understand the risks of not taking sustainability seriously. That's kind of my key message for today. The positive for retailers is that sustainability can be tackled in a number of different facets of the business. So whether it's the products that you sell, whether it's the products you consume, or it's the end of life of both of those aspects, there's lots of different areas, and I'm sure that others will have more to say on this as well. There's lots of areas that retailers can focus on. But given that said, nevertheless, it's important that retailers understand that they're somewhat at a disadvantage too, because they're adding more products to the world, it's an absolute necessity really that sustainability is a priority strategy in every business, retailer and non-retailer. Obviously, the webinar today is more focused on retail. We know that despite the ongoing crisis of cost of living, that sustainability remains a top priority for consumers. According to a recent report by American Express, the research showed that 65% of UK consumers, consider the environmental impact of a purchase before they make it, while 41% say that they'd rather shop locally than online to mitigate the impact of the carbon footprint associated with digital deliveries. Now, we know that those are only two stats, and there's many other factors to consider. And this is just quite simply about safeguarding our planet's resources, and retailers can embrace this by minimising their ecological footprint, conserve resources and mitigate climate change. So in simple terms, it used to be seen as another way to promote brands, but now it's the oncoming generation are demanding genuine change. So with the likes of the owner of companies like Patagonia giving away shares to the planet, the bar is set high, but no action is too small. And I think that's another key message from today's webinar is it's not too late to start. There's nothing too small. There's no step too small to start. We're encouraging people to take a step in the right direction. It's not optional, it's mandatory. And I'm looking forward to hearing what the other panelists, my colleagues on the panel, have got to say. They're the experts. just a brief intro, and if anybody wants to connect with me directly on LinkedIn, I'll put my link in the chat. But back to you, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. Let's go round and introduce the panelists, and then everybody knows exactly who they are and what they do. Dean, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So good morning, everyone. Really glad to be part of the panel. So I'm Dean Kramer. I look after services at Currys. Just to be clear on what services means for Currys, it covers a few things, but it's basically anything that sits around the sale of our products. So delivery, installation, repair, trade-in, recycling, and a few other things as well. So delighted to be part of the discussion. I've been at Currys, as LinkedIn reminded me yesterday, 19 years now. So I've seen quite a bit of change in this area over the years. And I work very closely with our sustainability team at Currys, because a lot of the propositions that we bring in services have a big bearing on our sustainable practices and what we do with customers in that regard. So hopefully you can share some insight, and look forward to having the discussion.
Really good to have you here, Dean. Zoe, let's hand over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Zoe Rousewell. I'm the co-founder of a B2B retail software startup called Turn Eco. My background is all in digital and e-commerce. I've worked in e-commerce for quite some time. I've led the digital proposition for brands from Topshop, Jimmy Choo to Urban Outfitters. But a few years ago, myself and my partner Kate actually set up our own digital consultancy to focus specifically on sustainable retailers. Felt that there was a big opportunity to help brands and retailers on that journey and help the planet in the process. And through that consultancy, I think we learned a lot more about the term, the circular economy, and what that meant for retail, and also the challenges and the opportunities that they faced in starting this journey. But saw a bit of a gap in the market, really, to help them more easily move towards circularity and embedding circular models directly into their business. And that's really where the idea for Turn Eco is born. So we help brands and retailers of any size build brand-owned circular models so they can meet their business objectives and their sustainability goals, reduce waste, increase customer lifetime value, and unlock the new opportunities for revenue growth that these models could deliver.
Great, thanks. Elena?
Hi everyone, really glad to be on the panel this morning. My name is Elena Oyun. I work in the ESG advisory practice at Deloitte. Deloitte, for those of you that don't know what we do, we're a global professional services firm that support clients across their business. That's from digital transformation through to things like tax advice and audit. Our ESG practice specifically works across the whole area of E, S, and G. So in terms of environment, things like helping clients with their net zero targets, developing roadmaps and helping them reduce their carbon footprint. On the kind of S, social element, working with clients in terms of looking at their supply chain, on how they can be improving things like human rights and workforce well-being. And also on the governance side, in terms of how companies can ensure that they've got the appropriate structures and processes in place to be managing their exposure to climate change and sustainability. I'm really excited to be on the panel today with lots of other businesses that are kind of working towards this mission. My background specifically focuses on helping retail clients, helping to prepare for ESG regulations. So really about understanding the complex landscape and acronym soup that ESG regulations can be, and then helping them build and enhance their approach to be able to respond to those. So I'll be talking about that a little bit later, but nice to be here today.
Brilliant, great to have you here. And finally, Ilana.
Hi, lovely to see everyone. It's really interesting to be on the panel, as you've just said, really interesting voices here. I am Ilana Adamson. I set up Be Better Sustainability. I moved into sustainability 20 years ago from the luxury goods market, recognised a lack of leadership actually for the business community. And I think, on a global scale, I think that's sadly still the case. There's still a deficit in leadership in that everywhere. So we work to embed credible sustainability for all, any industry and within that, any department. So, and that can go from the why of sustainability, the what is sustainability, because I think many people get stuck on that as well, and the how to implement that, whether that's the mandatory disclosures or looking at bringing circularity in. A lot of our time is spent educating at the moment, because that knowledge deficit is in every department, and that we like to, when we approach sustainability, we look at it as a thread that runs through the whole company, not just a department. So yeah, I'll pop my LinkedIn, and we run courses, so I'll pop those in the chat, and if anyone wants to connect with me, that would be lovely. Looking forward to hearing what you all have to say.
Great, thanks. Really looking forward to getting into the conversation. I've got lots and lots of questions for the panelists, but if anybody has any questions, can you put them in the Q&A? Yeah, let's get going. I want to start with the priorities for retailers in becoming more sustainable. Obviously for you, Dean, it's a huge priority at Currys. But what are those priorities? Tell us a little bit more about.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's two things really. One is emissions and energy usage. That's obviously a big part of it, and we've got our own commitments towards net zero. We've been on a journey with it, and we've seen a good deal of reduction over the last couple of years in our various emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3. And there's three real key aspects to that. One is the fleet. Obviously, we have a big network. So we've got a commitment to taking all of our small fleet over to EV, and a large chunk of our medium and heavy fleet over there. Renewable energy in stores. All of our stores are 100% powered by renewable energy, and we've made a big transition over to things like LED lighting, and also sensible use of energy in stores. So we've just small initiatives like not having everything blaring at 9 in the morning when there's no customers in the store. So the emissions is one side of it, and then product is obviously the other big side of it. And there's a few legs to that. So the first thing is supply, our choice of supplier. We work with a company called EcoVadis, who help us assess the sustainability credentials. I'm sure a few people on here have heard of them. The products themselves. So we've had a big push in demand for greener products over the last few years, particularly in appliances, and particularly fueled by the energy, the boost in energy cost. That's the second area. And then through the life cycle, so packaging, big thing. So, you know, both the usage and the disposal of it, repairability when it comes to in life. And then when it's finally time for the product to lay to rest, the ability to recycle it without having any waste or product going to landfill. So yeah, for us in Currys, particularly with the nature of the products that we sell, there's a lot to be done and a lot of priorities around sustainability.
Yeah, lots to be done there. Elena, what about you, from the clients that you're dealing with? What are you seeing the priorities?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think building on what Dean's been saying, absolutely, I think kind of understanding and reducing environmental impacts is a really big area that we're seeing all retailers focusing on. You know, retail is a big contributor when it comes to environmental impacts, and it's in a challenging place in the fact that it's actually about throughout the whole value chain. So particularly for our retail clients, is a key thing is about understanding what their scope 3 emissions are. So emissions that sit within their value chain but aren't direct things that they can control and influence, and helping them think about, okay, well, what are some of the quick wins that they can do within their own control, like we've been saying around switching energy suppliers, reducing waste, but also how they can work collaboratively with that value chain to be also reducing that environmental impact, and also really understanding the scale of that impact. I'd say a second thing kind of outside of that environmental impact is really around ethical sourcing and supply chain transparency. So kind of ties into that point around what we've been talking about with retail, but essentially when we're looking not only at environmental impact, but also broader sustainability issues like ethical sourcing, there's a really key challenge and a really key focus about actually being able to understand where you're getting your products from, how they've been produced, and ultimately how that then goes through to the supplier. And so supply chain transparency is definitely something that we're seeing a really increasing part of that, partially driven by what regulations requiring companies to disclose. And also given the kind of reality of the globalized nature of the way that we produce things. So it's not only important to be able to understand from an environmental impact perspective, but actually it means that you've got better supply chain resilience if you know where your products are from and how they're produced. And I'd say the final one is really around customer engagement and trust. So it's really kind of exciting to hear about what we see from generational trends in terms of consumer asking for more sustainable products. And actually at Deloitte, we do an annual sustainable consumer survey, and a lot of the evidence that we get from that research supports that. So even the last 12 months, 40% of respondents had, for example, bought a second-hand or refurbished product, which is definitely different to what we'd seen before. But we also know that the rate of demand isn't necessarily the scale that's needed for that widespread change. And so that we know that when it comes to consumers, and particularly we're looking at kind of with the current economic outlook, is that actually some of the barriers highlighted for consumers is about the lack of clear information that help them decide what sustainable projects they want, and also actually the affordability of those products. So I think a big part that we're looking with retailers on is about how can we keep making sure that there's more transparent, credible information. It doesn't just seem like green claims, actually, that they can kind of support those claims that they're making around their products. And also how can we kind of innovate to be able to create that kind of commercial, kind of reduce almost the premium around sustainable products so that it's more accessible for all.
That's there's so much to unpack there, but it is challenging. It's not easy. First everyone's got to get their head around it and what it means, but it is really challenging to tackle sustainability. It's not going to be easy for everyone. Dean, what do you find the biggest challenges for you are when it comes to being more sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, Elena just touched on a couple of the key ones there. Scope 3 emissions make up 99% of the emissions in our supply chain, and it's quite hard to get your hands on that because we work with huge global companies, Apple, Samsung, others, that getting to the point of influence with some of those brands is not always easy, and also getting the balance right between what customers want in terms of product and having sustainability in mind as well is a tough way off. I think that the second point that was just made about, particularly in the current cost of living crisis, weighing off the consumer choice between cost and sustainability is important, because there will always be a subset of customers who are most passionate about sustainability and will pay more perhaps for that, but then there's a huge swathe of customers that have a choice to make. And so if you can get both things right, refurb is a really good example. Actually, we've just started to try and expand in that area where you can get something that's affordable and drive sustainability. That's perfect. And then beyond that, at the end of life of the product, the other bit is repairability. So first of all, how's the product made in the first place? Is it made so that it can be repaired /recycled if it can't be repaired? But also then access to parts on a consistent basis, which is why we're happy around that we've got things like right to repair increasing in profile, because it puts the burden on manufacturers and the likes of ourselves to be able to offer repair for a much longer period of time. So yeah, there's a few logistical challenges, but there's also the consumer challenge of the way off between wanting to do the right thing but also not necessarily being in a position to pay a premium for it.
Yeah. Ilana, what about you? You work with a lot of customers. What are the biggest challenges that are coming up, and what kind of things are you doing to overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest issue, and Dean, you've just touched on it, as have many others, but it's this tension at the moment. I think organisations understand that they want to be sustainable, consumers understand that they want to be sustainable, and we're in this kind of grey area of transition at the moment. And so there's a tension, whether it's in terms of consumers prepared to pay more, for instance, for something that's sustainable, or it's in organisations where they're having to answer to boards in terms of short-term shareholder returns, or and setting out that long-term strategy. So that tension is where I think it's very difficult at the moment, and we're waiting really for good organisations to model how that's done successfully, and we're not far away from that sort of tipping point, but for organisations to not be investing in that and to be just profiting from it, we're not quite there yet. And so I think that tension is going to be problematic over the next sort of 5-10 years as organisations decide how much do we want to throw at this now. And the reason for that tension is largely that stakeholder expectations are changing, evolving, and it's a fast moving landscape. So when we talk about stakeholders, I think we're very familiar with consumers as stakeholders, or supply chain possibly, or even our boards. But actually, I think we need to broaden that out and look at future talent. We need to look at future consumers and what they'll expect from us. We need to look at, we need to include sort of regulatory bodies and upcoming mandatory demands that will be coming on those stakeholders. So we need to include sort of policymakers as a stakeholder, and of course the environment on which we're dependent in order to have the businesses that we have, in order to draw down that natural capital to succeed. We need to protect the very thing that we're reliant on. So there's a lot of tension, but we're seeing a huge amount of success happening. We need 30% is the number we've been told of organisations to reach tipping point, and then it drags everyone along in the slipstream. So we're much closer to that over the last few years than we were for the last 20 years that I've been here.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that I've discovered through even doing the webinar, and when people were registering, we asked them what their biggest challenges were, and waste came up at by far the top. How can retailers reduce their waste? Terry, obviously you work in packaging. What kind of things are you advising with your customers?
Well, Sam, it's like a massive subject, waste, and I could probably talk for hours on it. Not that I know much about it, but and I'm sure the others have got plenty to say on it as well. But the area we have the most experience in is consumables, and so we're always continually looking at, and I can give some quick wins in terms of consumables that we offer that have a closed loop system or a zero waste system, or that have a that have a genuine impact on reducing carbon footprint. But as I see it, there's you've got three main areas to consider, and the first one is supply chain. So having a collaborative, joined up approach with your suppliers, and I know that Dean alluded to this earlier. Having a joined up approach and prioritising suppliers that are aligned with your values, particularly around reducing primary packaging on products. So that's really important, obviously not at the expense of having things arrive damaged, etc., and there's always that way off as well. But we would always encourage, one of the areas that we do a lot of work on is encourage down gauging of plastics. So where plastic's absolutely necessary on a product like garment packaging, etc., we work on down gauging. So I was doing some work with a company recently where we were looking at shirt bags, and you could reduce the thickness of the bag without reducing the integrity and quality of it by about 30%, and actually that's a cost saving. So it's an environmental solution, but it's a cost saving. And then you can also consider bio-based products like sugarcane based products that are carbon neutral from a manufacturing perspective, and compostable products, and so you've just got to, plastic isn't going to go away. I know there's a huge narrative, a huge debate about plastic versus paper, and I'm sure we've covered it off before, but it's just about making sure that the packaging you use is fully recyclable, and I know that Dean's also alluded to that. It's about whatever you can't prevent, make sure that you can recycle it at the end of its use, or at best reuse it. So and then a lot of it comes down to education and awareness as well. We feel that's a huge area that we can do more, particularly in regard to our own people in our own business, but also our clients and people we interact with. Is education around waste and helping people to understand the impact of waste on the environment. And then you've got consumables in stores, as I mentioned, and we've got various products like our cleaning product range is completely zero waste. So the bottles actually get collected by Royal Mail free of charge and go back to be cleaned and refilled. So it's an eco-friendly, it's an environmentally friendly product. It's vegan, it's cruelty-free, and it's got a lot of credentials and credibility. But then on the top of that, it's one of the only systems that has a closed loop system so you're not chucking away empty bottles. And that's great, and it's been very well received by retailers. We also do things like, if you're in fashion retailing, we do the tagging attachments that go in the tag guns for attaching labels to garments. We do those made from 100% post-consumer waste, so they're a completely circular product. We're working on an exciting new project on thermal till receipt rolls, where we're halving the time you're changing the roll. So we worked on the thickness of the material to get a larger quantity on a roll, so you're not shipping so much air in the box, you're changing the rolls less often. And they're kind of, I'm sorry, but sometimes we're a bit just pragmatic, and I don't want sustainability just to become a tick box exercise in our business. I want it to be like tangible, actual, practical steps that people can take. And then, of course, the end of life of products, and that's probably somewhere where retailers are judged on most is, you know, returns, end of lines, overstocks, etc. And I would just encourage people to look at donation and schemes whereby, you know, recycling programs. Perhaps I know that many retailers do this, but partnering with a charity that's close to your heart, it has a social benefit too. And you know, you can donate unsold goods through charities. I know that you know, Currys is a company that does that very well. But it reduces waste, but it also contributes to the community engagement. So that's really important. I was visiting a client the other day called Salvation Army. We do a lot of work in the third sector, and they've got a huge new facility in Kettering. And one of the things they do is fibre sort. And it's definitely well worth looking up online. It's an amazing thing where they sort textiles and they're actually sending those textiles into recycling streams. So they're getting really granular with regard to how they recycle textiles. And I know that a lot of retailers are partnering with the likes of SATCO, Salvation Army, to help them with those end of life problems. But yeah, I'm sure that others have got more to say on this than I have.
There's lots of insights there, and it can be just some really simple things. Zoe, you work in the circular economy, another way to reduce waste. Why don't you tell us a bit more about your thoughts on how to reduce waste?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question, actually, because waste generally itself is a very broad spectrum from a retail perspective, and it can be found across the entire business, as Terry kind of alluded to, from product design through to the end of life. So, you know, if you're thinking, you know, every department in your business needs to be thinking about the waste in their processes and, you know, what they're producing. So starting from the outset, like, can you design products that minimize the material waste? And what about things like the packaging that products get delivered to your warehouse in, and garment tags and all of that stuff that's been touched upon? Overproduction is a big issue, and there's a lot of waste that happens there. So can you relook at how you forecast demand and order quantities to reduce that potential waste as well? In stores, can you be clever about your POS and marketing materials and the fixtures and fittings, and use and how you repurpose them so that they don't end up being used once and thrown away? E-commerce, we've touched on packaging and stuff. Can you reduce the number of different types of packaging? So I've worked in retailers before where we had a box for, you know, every single potential product that could potentially go in a box, but by reducing the number of boxes that we actually created, the number of sizes, you can then reduce the amount of waste, and it's more efficient. But then what happens to returns when they come back? So are you able to resell them? And if not, is there a way that you can refurbish them to become so they're not becoming waste? Can you break them down into spares and repairs and put them back into your supply chain as kind of a regenerative supply chain? And then definitely, as Terry touched upon, and kind of where our focus is end of life. So what is happening to your products at the moment when your customers are done with it? Do you know what they're doing? Are they throwing them away? Because up to about 80% is a general kind of statistic as to what gets sent to landfill. So how do you help your customers deal with these items more responsibly to stop them going from landfill? How do you extend the life of those products and extract the most value out of them so they don't go to waste? Charity and donation, as Terry pointed out, is definitely one route, but not everything is suitable for donation. And also, if you're a retailer and looking to build your business into the future and become circular, there are a lot of other brand-owned circular retail opportunities that you can look to embed into your business, from kind of buyback or trade-in, and then resale, recycling yourself. You know how you made that product, you know what materials went into it. You're, you know, arguably the best place to make the decision on what the next best life for that product is and how it stops going to landfill. So I guess what I'm saying, there's not a single issue. It's not a single issue that just one department needs to be responsible for. Like, every area of the business needs to think about it. But all of these kind of incremental changes can help the overall waste impact and your footprint.
You mentioned landfill, and I've seen some really big horror stories where retailers saying that they're recycling, and then you're seeing their brand on landfill sites, and it can, you know, it can really cause some harm to them as a business when they're talking about recycling so much. How do you prevent that from happening?
So I think where we see the opportunity from brands and retailers is to really take ownership of this from start to finish. Circularity, you really need to own the process. So once your products have been sold to your customers, and as I talked about, like, what do they do with it when they have finished with it? Some people are happy to sell on an eBay, you know, or Vinted or Depop or wherever it is, and deal with it responsibly and extend the life that way. But as a retailer, you're not in control of that. You don't know where your product's going to end up. And actually, if you sell them to, you know, your end of life products or your surplus stock, or you bring stuff back and then you donate it, it does often just get packaged up and sent off to kind of, you know, the South, global South, and ends up in landfill or in secondary markets there somewhere that you just don't have any control of. And so when you're starting to think about your kind of reporting and your kind of full life cycle and what circularity means to you, you do have to take that into consideration, which is why we are, you know, kind of huge supporters of really owning these programs, so that you are in complete control of what happens to that product and can, you know, openly say, right, this is not going to landfill, or this is the proportion of waste from our business, but we know exactly what that is and what's happened to it because we've fully embraced it and fully own it and know what's happening.
I think sorry,
Sorry,
I think the golden nugget here, just from what Zoe said, is that if retailers and brands are considering for the end of life before they make the products in the first place, and they own the whole process, it makes it a whole lot easier. And that's really the critical thing, isn't it? Do you think so?
Yeah, that's definitely it. I mean, as I said, it starts with design. So what materials am I making this out of? How am I designing it? How is it being manufactured? And then what does that actually mean for end of life? Can this be, you know, is it designed for repairability or durability or recycling? But knowing that from the outset means that kind of it's much easier and much more transparent through the full life cycle of that product, what's going to happen to it at the end of it and how you deal with it so that it doesn't just get thrown in the bin.
Dean, what do you do at Currys?
Yeah, I mean, some great stuff there. I think all of that has to be taken into account. I mean, we've got a priority order with circularity, and the good thing about electronics is that circularity is a benefit to all stakeholders. You know, it can be profitable. Some of the work in circular for us as a retailer. From a customer point of view, it's good even if you're not environmentally focused. There's money to be extracted out of refurbing tech and repairing tech. And obviously environmentally it's good. So our preference order is always that to offer the chance to repair before we replace. If we do have to replace it and there's some inherent value in the kit through trade-in or other schemes like that, then all the better. Typically that's been sort of limited to smaller gadgets over the years. So people are used to trading in their mobile phone, but we've started to test things like TVs and other larger appliances over the years, because otherwise that's the stuff that tends to end up in landfill. And then if it does need to be recycled, then having a good route. So Zoe mentioned one there, parts extraction for other repair is an area we've been growing massively in our repair centre over the last couple of years. There's so much good stuff that can be broken out before the other parts are recycled. And that avoids us having to reorder brand new spare parts in our repair operation. So we've got a real chain and a flow that goes through, but there's definitely a preferential order. The bit that's tricky to see with electronics is exactly how many things are just sat in drawers. You know, we've got an estimate and you see stats, 40 million bits of kit sitting in drawers. And I'm sure we've all got some stuff lurking in the cupboards, especially small kitchen gadgets. But you need to encourage customers to do something with that. It's quite hard to get people motivated behind it unless there's a sort of prompt, which is why we've done things like cash for trash over the last 6-12 months, which is a financial incentive for customers to get out and drop off small kit to stores for recycling. And we've seen a huge response to that. That's really transformed how people see it. So you've got to make it easy for customers to activate these things unless they're, you know, really already entrenched and engaged in it.
Yeah,
that was going to exactly be my point, actually, is that we've all got stuff in drawers, cupboards, sheds, lofts, regardless of what it is, whether that's an old mobile phone, a pair of trousers that don't fit, cushions that don't match your newly decorated living room. And like, we as consumers, the easy option is to throw it in the bin right now. So how do we make it really easy for consumers to change their behavior? Because if it's too onerous and the route to responsible disposal is too difficult, we're not going to do it. So there are, as I said, some people that are willing to be sellers and sell their stuff, or even give it away in secondhand marketplaces, etc. But there's a lot of people that don't want the hassle and level of effort involved in that. So how, as retailers, do you take ownership and help them on that journey and give them easy routes to do it, so it becomes a no-brainer and just part of that? Okay, I'm done with it, I can give it back to the retailer that I bought it from, and they'll give me a little bit of credit maybe as a reward for that, and then I've got win-win because I've done something responsible with it. I know they're going to deal with it, and it's not going to go to landfill, and hey, I've got a little bit of credit that makes me feel a little bit warmer and fuzzier about that brand and that experience as well.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to the reason that people don't throw away or recycle their mobile phones and laptops and computers is because of the data that they keep in there, because they keep so much data in there. But being able to give that back to the retailer, that there's that part of trust that it's going to go somewhere safe. And I think that's why it's so good for retailers to work with their customers to return your stuff to them. The other bit, I just wanted to move on. Gosh, this is going so quick, this webinar. The other big thing that came out, the biggest challenge, was around packaging. Terry, you mentioned briefly about the packaging challenges, but what kind of materials are the best to use? There's that is plastic or is it paper? It's a big part of the conversation. What are your thoughts and views?
Thanks, Sam. It's a challenging one, because there is always that debate, and there's fors and against for everything. And I think where we sit, and I touched on this earlier, being fairly pragmatic and practical about sustainability, we really encourage people to embrace recycled content, because there's a lot of products out there that I may have used this example before, but we do a lot of work with like reusable bags, shopper bags, tote bags, that kind of thing. And there's a bit of a drive currently to make bags from recycled bottles, where actually if you just look into a little bit, you don't have to do very much digging to find out that it's quite an ethical practice, because once you've recycled that PET into a textile, you can't then recycle it again. And also you find that there's factories being set up in the Far East to manufacture bottles to then be recycled into products. So there's some fairly unethical behaviours going on around products where people think they're doing the right thing. So we really encourage people to look long and hard at the supply chain. We're doing quite a lot of work currently in bio-based products, so sugarcane-based products, and yes, they can be carbon neutral, but we're really honest about the fact that it's normally carbon neutral from a manufacturing perspective only, because you couldn't say that without knowing exactly where it was going to land in the world. But there's we found that there's rogue products out there even in those regards. So it's really important that retailers are doing their due diligence, actually actively looking at who's the manufacturer of that bio-based product that's going into your carrier bags. Are they credible? Where's that product come from? Is it waste? Is it impacting the food chain, for instance? So that's really important. But, recycled content for us is really important because, broadly, it meets the needs of things like the plastic packaging tax, but it helps products become more circular. And I think that the main thing there is just not at the expense of quality or integrity of product, because you don't want things breaking down. Compostable products are great, and that's great. I had an example recently where we were supplying a compostable product to a company, and they had pictures of their products being decomposed in a home compost bin. That's fantastic. I completely support those kind of products, but a lot of compostable products on the market can only be decomposed in an industrial facility, and they're few and far between, and actually getting that to that facility is nigh on impossible, so they tend to go to landfill. So it's just about understanding those things about different materials, and not just picking something that looks good and might just end up ticking a box. And by all means, you know, without being a sales pitch, we talk to people like ourselves, talk to people who can give you good advice, and actually prepared to do that, a little bit of that digging for you. And the choice of packaging really depends on all those different factors, you know, the type of product, the transportation, all those kind of things. But it's just crucial to consider the whole cycle of your packaging that you're using, and just look at down gauging wherever possible, recycling, etc.
Yeah, and I think we're in a time of innovation and new products and new innovative ways of making things are coming out all the time, and that education piece is really important, and to do your due diligence on that. I wanted to move over to a bit of the strategy side for you know, for all of us as businesses. One of the things that everyone is trying to do is, we've got that net zero goal. We need to reduce our emissions. We need to get to net zero. We're in a climate crisis. Ilana, what would your advice be to companies that are trying to get to net zero? Where do they start?
Yeah, probably not what you expect. I mean, there's a practical how to do it. So the how to do it would be to understand your baseline, what your footprint is in sustainability, in carbon, and then to reduce it. And the best way to do that, I personally think, I know there's a lot of tools out there that will calculate for you, but particularly if you're a smaller operation, putting the time in and plotting the numbers yourself, you'll start to see trends in the data where you can actually start to reduce. So one of our clients, we've just gone through, and they realized that actually only 3 people were going into the office environment on a Friday. So we've made the policy now not to go in at all. So you're not having to turn anything on. So some of it's housekeeping. But overall, I would say, reflecting what so many of you had said earlier, it's this education and this, so where you were saying earlier about the fabrics not or being compostable and some of them not, this moves into that greenwashing territory where some people are rushing so much to do what they think is ticking the boxes, as we've mentioned, but actually will end up coming back to bite. And so the education, the knowledge bit is so important to understand, what does this actually mean? Because you can tick a box to do it, but it won't actually tick those boxes long term, if that makes sense. And sustainability is about resilience for business as much as anything, and it's about figuring where your profit will be in the future. So within that, and particularly if there's high street retailers or small retailers, or even the large ones, and I know we spoke about this before, Dean, finding ways that you can collaborate, finding ways that you can work across an ecosystem is vital. We've got in this mindset of over the last 20-30 years of produce to waste, and we need to shift that back to that old school thinking that, you know, if you bought a Hoover, you bought a Hoover for life and it would be repaired, and, you know, and all of these things that Dean has been speaking about as well. So a lot of this is mindset shift. So if you go about this in a box ticking way and you're not taking your stakeholders, you're not building an ecosystem to support that, you will come up against obstacles. So really that mentality of let's talk to our supply chain, let's talk to our consumers, let's tell them why this is important, let's hear from them what is important to them, let's educate them on why we're making these changes and how they can be part of the solution. And why it's so important. I think don't shy away from the conversation of climate change and the impact of climate change. I think set your stall up to be a part of that solution and take your stakeholders on that journey with you. I think it's vital, and the collaboration wherever you can, get out of the silos and collaborate everywhere that you possibly can.
And the good thing is that regulations are coming in, so people do have to do something, you know, whether that's net zero or TCFD. Elena, can you tell us a little bit more about those regulations and what kind of things that, because sometimes when I go into clients and I'm doing training, they don't even realize that there are any regulations out there. What kind of things, regulations do you think are important for retailers?
Yeah, absolutely. So regulations is absolutely a really hot topic in this space, and I think it's actually something that can be a little bit divisive, because on the one hand it's exciting because it does drive change, and I think a key focus on a lot of the regulations that we're seeing is really about recognizing at the moment there's a lot of information out there, but the quality and the way that it can be processed is inconsistent, and it's about raising the bar. But there's also a bit of a risk of regulation that it can then become something which is quite a box tick exercise about what's the minimum requirement. So whenever we're working with our clients, it's really about helping them balance that and making sure that actually that the ambition is really thinking about what's right for the resilience of the business and long term. There are a rising tide of regulations. So in terms of what's applicable for each individual retailer, it will really depend on your business size, your corporate structure, your value chain, and also what are your most material impacts, or what areas are impacting more. So whether that is environment, whether that's the more social components, or whether it's kind of covering both of them in governance. I think a few kind of particular ones that I would highlight, maybe an example of one that's current and one that's emerging and one that's incoming. So big regulation that many retailers may already or will likely already be covered by is TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures. And this really focuses on helping, it kind of came from the recognition of what I was saying about there was a lot of sustainability information out there, and often a lot of information about how businesses are potentially having an impact on the environment, but it didn't actually give investors, and a lot of these initiatives are actually driven by investor communities, comparable information to understand how resilient that business was to impacts relating to climate specifically, and whether that had been considered in terms of, you know, the short, medium, long term, and in a range of possible futures. So in this area, we know that we're really focusing on trying to reduce the overall global kind of temperature rise, but actually depending on what increase that is, the impacts on our businesses will be different. And so TCFD is something that started as a voluntary initiative, but actually is now, at least in the UK, is a requirement for kind of publicly listed companies, and also the kind of what was previously BAYS. There's kind of a lightened version also that's applicable for private companies. And so that is a kind of really foundational piece, which is looking at how climate risk impacts businesses. A couple of other ones that I'll mention just high level, if that works, sorry. There's a couple of new ones, which is one of them is the International Sustainability Standards Board, which builds on what TCFD is and is having a bit of a broader sustainability focus. And the third one I'd mention is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is an EU legislation. So the reason why I mentioned that one, and I kind of mentioned a few of them incrementally, is that what we're seeing is an expansion of the kinds of regulation that are coming in, from focusing in on very particular areas like climate to actually being much broader and focused on, okay, well, what does it take us to have a kind of a system-wide transition, a sustainable economy? And so particularly when we look at something like CSRD that's requiring a really kind of broad range of data across from businesses all the way through from, you know, what's your environmental impact through to your more social impact. It's essentially a lot of what these regulations are doing is really asking businesses to think about, okay, well, what are your impacts on people and planet? And how, and also how do people and planet impact your business and your strategy, and how resilient are you to that? So I'd say it can be confusing to navigate. I know someone was asking on one of the questions of how do you navigate that, but I think really the best way to do that is actually to think about the intent of what these are trying to do, and kind of align your business ambition in line with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be confusing, and thanks Ilana for putting the acronyms in there.
The alphabet soup.
I know it can be complex though, and it's really confusing, and you know, that's the thing, when you speak to people, they don't realize there's not enough education on what these regulations are, and they're all so new and people are learning about them. Sam,
can I just add in, because I just think it's just on that point, I thought it's really the trickle down effect of that, because at the moment that's publicly listed companies, but when we're going back to that supply chain and we're going back to that ecosystem, if you're not a publicly listed company, don't close your mind off and think that this doesn't affect you, because you're in a supply chain. So the best way to think about it is that we're all somebody's scope 3. So as these regulations are coming down the line, they will affect. So if somebody's trying to reduce their carbon footprint, for instance, and they have a mandate to only work with suppliers that have a carbon reduction strategy, you're taking yourself out of bid opportunities and refusing, really being anti-competitive in terms of the work that you'll be able to secure. So I think it's really important to bear in mind that element, that it will affect you because you're part of those ecosystems, and secondly that it sets a bar for what the best practices or just standard practice will become. And I think it's important to have an eye on where that's going for all organisations. It's not just publicly listed. A lot of this was considered to be a space for profit-making organisations in reducing their exposure to risk. But actually what we're seeing now is you're seeing huge shifts. Even Church of England have moved all of their pensions away from fossil fuels. So you're starting to see third sector really having to engage in this from a different leverage point, because that's around their commitment to their stakeholders in order to ensure that they have a planet to inherit. So I think it's important to just be aware in the education process across all of it, regardless of where you sit in publicly listed or not.
Yeah, and actually that brings me on to one of my other points. People are really nervous about how they speak about everything in case they're accused of greenwashing. And I've seen some fantastic sustainability driven companies that have been accused of environmental impacts that are really bad, and they're not putting out there in the right way. It's a massive topic at the moment, greenwashing, green hushing. People are too frightened to speak about it. How do companies, how can they be careful of greenwashing? What's the best way to go through that? Ilana, I know it's something you've spoken about a lot, actually.
Yeah, I again, it's that education process, and I think for me, greenwashing is the most phenomenal lens to understand how to get it right. So if you put everything through the filter of am I greenwashing or am I not, you start to see the amount of work that is required to make some of those huge statements that we have seen in the marketplace. And that's not to say it shouldn't feel frightening, because most of those good organisations, most well-meaning organisations, have almost been pulled into greenwashing because it became the market speak. And so to become competitive, you use the same language as everybody else in the marketplace, and you sort of tiptoed into greenwashing unintentionally. But what I would say is, to avoid it, there's 6 rules I can email a couple of slides to you, Sam, if you want to email it on to people if they want it.
Yeah, if you send that,
contact me directly.
I'll put it in the when we send out the recording for everyone. Yeah,
there's 6 clear rules, and a lot of that is about the comparisons you make. So you mentioned, Terry, around the compostable or not compostable, and it's such a good example, because so many people are saying this is compostable packaging. And actually, if you look into it, that would fall foul of the Green Claims Codes, which is the Competitions and Markets Authority in the UK did a brilliant piece of work where they've laid out these 6 rules around how not to greenwash, basically. And one of them would say, you know, are you giving all of the information? So if it requires, and you gave a brilliant example, Terry, because you said that it was a picture of it decomposing in somebody's home compost. But actually a lot of the packaging, not a lot, but a considerable volume of packaging that we see that says it's compostable will require special circumstances to do that. So it will require, you know, an industrial composting centre that is, you know, 40 miles away from your home. So it might be possible to compost it, but the average consumer is not going to drive it 40 miles, and would we want them to, in order to compost it? So what the Green Claims Codes would say are, you are misleading the customer and distorting the market because you're making a profit from something that is not, that you have not made it clear exactly how you would go about that. But I can send, I mean, we could do an entire webinar on this, so maybe we should do that. But it's to me, it affects everybody, and it's about credibility as well as compliance, and there are fines. So what I would say is that the fine that is being banded around now is 10% of global turnover. So it's bigger than GDPR because it distorts the marketplace so much. So I would say everybody should get a handle on greenwashing and how not to do it. And you can, I will send the slides, but if you go on to the Competitions and Markets Authority government website, you'll be able to find information there.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen recently the ASA, they've been pulling companies up left, right and centre, and there's huge fines going out to organisations. They're really, really taking it seriously. I can't believe we've only got 5 minutes left. Another question that I just do want to include before we finish, and that's about how retailers can tackle the cost of living. You know, it's a massive problem. Prices going up everywhere. It's a big issue. We see it in the news a lot. What, Zoe, do you want to come in here? What do you think that retailers can do? They're trying to sell more and more and more products. I mean,
well, that in itself is a is a challenge. So retailers need to continue to grow their business, right? So that's their overall purpose. But they need to find a way to do it that's sustainable and profitable. And I think that is part of their challenge at the moment, is like, how do we shift from a linear model to a circular model, and how do we make that profitable? So the cost of living crisis is definitely playing into the massive growth that we're seeing in the secondhand market currently, and the rise of resale. And there is a huge opportunity for retailers to really understand how their customers are behaving in that secondhand market already. Are they participating? If not, what the barriers are, and then thinking about what that means to their business and their profit. I mean, Dean talked about kind of refurbished products. We definitely see huge value to retailers offering, you know, buyback and trade in, and then resale potentially, or repairs within their business, because the reality is, for a variety of reasons, cost of living one, but you know, sustainability considerations as well, that people are actively choosing secondhand. So for many retailers at the moment, their products are being sold in the secondhand marketplace, and their customers are buying them, but they have no kind of control over that. They have no skin in the game. So how do they start to understand what their customers want, and how they build that into their business? Because long term, that also then gives them another revenue opportunity, that they can start to reduce their reliance on selling new products, because they have another way of generating and growing their business, one that is more sustainable and better for the planet, but then also kind of taps into the, how do we extend the life of these products? How do we extract the most value, and kind of and change the direction of our business to reflect that?
One more question to you, Dean, actually, and this is that online versus store, something that, you know, I'm sure that Currys is going through the change, and as more people do shop online, what's more sustainable and where's things going? Are we going to, you know, have less stores? So many retailers are shutting their stores down and moving to online.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot. I mean, we closed 700 Carphone warehouse stores over the last few years, and we've now got, 300 stores remaining in the UK estate, which are under one brand of Currys now. There's always going to be a demand for physical retailer for certain product categories. Some categories have moved nearly wholly online, including some of our own electronics categories. And you can imagine those areas that don't have added value in store, a cable or some ink, are less likely to need a store presence to fulfill demand. But where there's a complex purchase, where there's demonstration needed, where there's advice and service needed, that's where the stores play a big role. Yeah, I mean, there are elements of stores that impact sustainability, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, we've got to think about how we make stores ever more sustainable in terms of energy usage and footprint and that sort of thing. You know, we've tried to focus the estate down on areas that have large enough catchments so that, you know, we're serving from one location many customers. And then I think it's about how we use the stores, and the area that we can dial up, no doubt, in our store locations is things like repair, trade-in, recycling, you know, helping use those areas to make sustainable practices easier for customers. Because of course, when we're going out with a van to collect, there's an opportunity, but equally for many customers, that's not convenient. And when they're driving by a store, it's another opportunity. So yeah, I think there's always going to be the need for both, but we've got to make sure that we're offering choice to customers in terms of doing the right thing from a sustainability point of view, and that's certainly our approach to it.
Yeah, thank you. Right, we are at the time. I just want to quickly go around all the panel. We've gone so quickly. I had so many more questions, but if I can just go around one sort of takeaway that you can give to the audience of what they can do in retail to be more sustainable. Ilana, I'll start with you.
Okay. Just very quickly, I would say, and thank you, Sam, for a wonderful conversation. It's been really enlightening, and to all the panelists. I would say very quickly, look to the future. So stop with the short-term thinking and start to look really long-term and understand who do you want to be in 10 years' time, and start plot it, or even longer, 30 years' time, and plot your way towards that, because I think the investment becomes less cumbersome once you're looking more long-term, and that's important. Think of your ecosystem. Education, 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 and collaboration, collaboration, collaboration.
Elena? Oh,
sorry, I was going to make a similar point. Yeah, I think it would be about actually starting from your business strategy and thinking about how sustainability really is the centre and the driver for that, and kind of tackling those bigger questions and using that as your North Star.
Is that me?
I think there's a general kind of feeling that moving towards circularity within a retail business is really hard and potentially not profitable. It's definitely some conversations that we've been having. But a takeaway from me is it's not as hard as you think it is. You don't have to have necessarily all of the answers to start with, but you should start. And being circular means truly changing your business model. So you need to own circularity from start to finish. So have a think about what that means for your business, figure out a pilot and get cracking.
Brilliant. Dean?
Yeah, I just think I repeat that you need to make these things easy and affordable for customers. At the end of the day, the customer drives demand for this stuff. So that's got to be top of mind when you're trying to put in place things that make your business more sustainable. That's our view anyway.
Brilliant. And finally, Terry, our partner for this webinar.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a great conversation, and I feel like we could carry on for a lot longer. But just two things that I'd like to say. Firstly, education, as Ilana mentioned, education is everything for me. Secondly, we've talked a lot about product in the business, but think about your processes too. So consolidate, streamline, optimize your processes, because that can cut out a lot of waste. And then just an example I had from one retailer that I was working with. They set up an impact manager in every department of the business, and the impact team came together as a sustainability team, and that's how they achieved B Corp status, was by having an impact manager in each department. Because I think Ilana mentioned that taking the stakeholders on the journey is probably one of the hardest things, and this was a national or a multinational retailer who said who've made a public claim to be carbon neutral by 2040. And actually there was a conflict in the business, and what they did was they set up an impact team and had an impact manager on each department. So that's just a simple practical tip there. So thank you.
Thank you to all of my panelists. Thank you for everyone that joined us live, and for those that watch after this conversation. We could have gone on. I had so many more questions. There were more questions in the Q&A. I'm sorry that we didn't get them answered. I will pass them on to the panelists to answer afterwards. This has been brilliant. I have learned so much just from listening to all of you. So thank you for your time, and I really appreciate it. Responsible Futures webinars is having a break for the summer. We'll be back in September with greening your workplace pension. So I'm looking forward to that. Please do connect with me on LinkedIn, and for all of our previous webinars, we've got loads of free content education. I'm going to put that in there as well, so go and have a look. Really appreciate everyone's time, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.